The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair, the kind that settles into your bones when hope has been stretched thin for too long. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as if they, too, were tired of witnessing endings. At the far end of the hallway, a single chair held a man who had not slept properly in days, maybe weeks. His shoulders bent forward under the invisible weight of fear, guilt, and prayers that felt unanswered. In his trembling hands was a folded piece of paper, creased so many times it looked fragile enough to tear apart with one more touch. It was the final bill, the last number standing between his wife's life and a goodbye he was not ready to accept. He stared at it, not knowing that before this night ended, a stranger would walk into his story and change the meaning of loss, kindness, and faith forever. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet miracles that still happen in this world, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive. The man's name was Daniel Harper, and until a year ago, he believed his life was ordinary in the safest way possible. He worked long hours as a delivery driver, waking before sunrise and returning home after dark, hands sore and back aching but heart full because he knew why he did it. His wife, Emily, had a laugh that filled rooms and a patience that softened even the hardest days. They lived in a small rented house with peeling paint and a stubborn leaky faucet, but it was home. They talked about saving for a better place, maybe one with a small garden where Emily could grow tomatoes and basil. They dreamed in modest ways, the kind that felt reachable if you just kept going a little longer. Then came the headaches. At first, they were small and easy to dismiss, the kind that came after a long day or too little water. Emily would smile it off, insisting she was fine, insisting Daniel not worry. But weeks passed and the headaches grew heavier, darker, stealing her appetite and her sleep. When she fainted one evening while setting the table, the sound of her body hitting the floor shattered something inside Daniel that never quite healed. The diagnosis arrived like a storm without warning. A serious illness, aggressive and unforgiving, the kind that demanded immediate treatment and offered no guarantees. The doctors spoke in careful tones, balancing realism with hope, while Daniel nodded and pretended to understand words that blurred together in his mind. All he heard was that time was precious, and nothing would ever be simple again. Treatment began quickly, hospital visits replaced quiet dinners, beeping machines replaced laughter. Bills arrived in thick envelopes, each one heavier than the last. Daniel worked longer hours, sometimes sleeping in his truck between shifts. He sold his old guitar, the one Emily loved to hear him play on weekends. He canceled insurance policies, borrowed from friends who were struggling themselves, and skipped meals without telling anyone. Every sacrifice felt small compared to the thought of losing her. Emily tried to remain strong, but Daniel could see the fear in her eyes during the long nights when pain kept her awake. He held her hand and promised things he was no longer sure he could deliver. He promised she would be okay. He promised they would get through this. He promised tomorrow would be better. Each promise became a silent prayer. Months passed like years. Some days brought hope, when test results showed improvement, when Emily smiled and talked about going home. Other days crushed that hope without mercy. The illness fought back harder each time, and the treatments took their toll. Daniel watched the woman he loved grow thinner, quieter, her strength slipping away piece by piece. Still, he stayed because leaving was never an option. The bills, however, did not share his loyalty. They piled up relentlessly, cold and indifferent to love or effort. The final bill arrived on a gray afternoon when Daniel had just finished a double shift. It listed numbers so large they felt unreal, like a mistake someone would surely correct, but no correction came. The hospital needed payment to continue certain treatments Emily still desperately needed. That was how Daniel ended up alone in the corridor that night, staring at the paper as if it might change if he looked hard enough. He felt embarrassed by his own helplessness. angry at a system that reduced life to numbers, and ashamed of the quiet thought that slipped into his mind. What if this was the end, not because Emily could not fight anymore, but because he could not afford for her to keep fighting? He buried his face in his hands, tears slipping through his fingers. He did not notice the footsteps approaching, soft and unhurried, until a shadow fell across the floor in front of him. The stranger was an older man, neatly dressed but without any sign of wealth that stood out. He carried himself with a calm that felt out of place in a hospital at midnight. He paused, looking at Daniel not with curiosity, but with recognition, as if he had seen this moment before in his own life. Daniel barely registered him at first. Pain narrows the world, making everything else fade into the background, but the stranger did not leave. He sat down in the chair beside Daniel, not too close, not too far, simply present. In that quiet presence, something shifted. Daniel felt seen, and that frightened him almost as much as it comforted him. Without asking questions, the stranger looked at the folded paper in Daniel's hands. Daniel wanted to pull it away to hide his shame, but exhaustion had stolen his strength. He let it be. The stranger read the numbers carefully, then folded the paper again and placed it gently back into Daniel's hands. He did not offer empty words or quick solutions. Instead, he rested his hands on his knees and breathed slowly, as if grounding himself in the moment. Daniel found himself speaking, not because he wanted to, but because the silence felt safe. He spoke about Emily, about their life before hospitals and fear, about how hard he had tried to do everything right. He admitted his terror of failing her. The words poured out unchecked, heavy and raw, and the stranger listened as if there was nowhere else he needed to be. When Daniel finished, he felt strangely lighter, though nothing had changed. The stranger nodded, eyes reflecting a sadness that suggested deep understanding. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook and a pen. The movement startled Daniel, who suddenly felt uneasy, unsure of what was coming next. The stranger wrote something quickly, tore out a page, and handed it to Daniel. On it was a name and a phone number, written in steady handwriting. Daniel looked up, confused, ready to refuse help he did not understand. Before Daniel could react, the stranger stood. He placed a hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture so gentle it felt like a blessing. Then he walked toward the nurse's station, leaving Daniel staring after him, unsure whether he had imagined the entire encounter. Minutes passed, then more. Daniel unfolded the paper again, then folded it back, his heart pounding. He considered standing up, following the stranger, demanding answers, but something told him to wait. Eventually, a nurse approached Daniel with an expression of cautious relief. She told him there had been an update regarding the account. The final bill, the one that had broken him moments ago, had been paid in full, not partially, not deferred, completely settled. Daniel felt dizzy. He asked how, asked who, asked if there had been a mistake. The nurse shook her head, explaining that a payment had been made anonymously, with clear instructions that no recognition or contact was desired. The hospital records listed only a name, the same name written on the slip of paper, now crumpled in Daniel's fist. The realization hit him with overwhelming force. The stranger, the man in the corridor, the weight Daniel had carried for months collapsed in an instant, replaced by sobs he could no longer hold back. He cried there in the hallway, not quietly, not politely, but with the full release of someone who had been drowning and suddenly found air. Emily received the treatment she needed. The following weeks were still difficult, still uncertain, but hope returned in small, fragile ways. Color slowly came back to her cheeks. She laughed again, softly at first, then with growing strength. Doctors spoke more positively. Daniel returned to the corridor often, hoping to see the stranger again, to thank him, to understand why he had done what he did. But the stranger never returned. Months later, Emily was finally well enough to go home. Their house was the same, small and imperfect, but it felt like a palace. Daniel cooked simple meals, burned a few of them, and laughed harder than he had in a year. Life did not magically become easy, but it became possible again. Daniel could not forget the kindness that had saved them. He carried it with him everywhere, a quiet fire in his chest. He began volunteering at the hospital, helping families navigate paperwork, sitting with those who waited alone in corridors that smelled of antiseptic and despair. He listened, just as the stranger had listened to him. One afternoon, while organizing donated items, Daniel found a familiar name on a stack of old records. Curiosity led him to ask a nurse about it. She hesitated, then explained that the man had once been a patient there, years ago. He had lost his wife to an illness just as unforgiving. He had been unable to save her, unable to pay the bills in time. The loss had changed him forever. After that, he dedicated his life to making sure others did not suffer the same fate, moving quietly, helping anonymously, leaving nothing behind but relief and second chances. Daniel stood there for a long time, absorbing the weight of that truth. The stranger had not paid the bill because he was rich. He had paid it because he understood the cost of not being able to. Years passed. Emily regained her strength fully, and life settled into a new normal. Daniel kept the slip of paper with the stranger's name, worn and faded, tucked inside his wallet. He never called the number. Some gifts, he learned, were meant to remain untouched, preserved in gratitude rather than repaid in words. Instead, Daniel paid it forward in small ways. He covered groceries for someone short at the checkout. He helped a neighbor fix a broken fence. He donated time, not money he did not have, but presence, the most valuable currency of all. On quiet evenings, Daniel and Emily would sit together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, aware of how close they had come to losing everything. They spoke less about the fear now and more about what truly mattered. The stranger became part of their story, a reminder that even in the darkest corridors, light could appear without warning. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still exists in a world that often feels cold, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps spread these stories of hope to those who may need them most. And before this story ends, we have a special request for you. In the comments, write one word that represents what this story made you feel. Hope, gratitude, faith, love. Let your word be a small light for someone else reading through. Daniel never met the stranger again, but he carried him forward in every act of compassion, every moment of patience, every choice to see another person's pain and not look away. The final bill had been paid, not just in money, but in understanding. And in that quiet truth, Daniel learned that sometimes the greatest miracles come not with noise or recognition, but in silence, leaving behind lives forever changed, and a reminder that humanity, at its best, is still capable of extraordinary grace.